Meghan's become a real nuisance around here. I've personally seen her drones drifting onto my property, constant, intrusive, and frankly unacceptable. Montecito officials have received multiple complaints from residents. It's clear she won't be staying much longer.
Meghan Markle and her husband Prince Harry purchased their Montecito estate in June 2020 for $14 million, a sprawling property with 9 bedrooms, 16 bathrooms, and all the trappings of a life lived at the very top of society. They arrived with enormous goodwill. They had walked away from the British royal family, citing the need for privacy, for peace, for a chance to build something of their own on their own terms. Montecito seemed like the perfect place to do it, and for a brief, hopeful moment, many of their neighbors welcomed them. That moment did not last. What Lowe has now shared publicly, through a podcast episode recorded in mid-2025, that millions of listeners decoded, despite the absence of explicit names, through conversations at local gatherings reported by multiple outlets, and through comments to journalists that have circulated widely, paints a picture of a neighborhood pushed past its limit. The allegations are serious and specific. Drones, bullying, intimidation, a pattern of behavior that residents say violated the unspoken covenant that makes Montecito the place it is. And when someone of Lowe's stature says these things, the world listens. Let us begin at the beginning, because this story did not start in December 2025 when headlines about eviction and drone spying exploded across social media. This story started years earlier, in the quiet accumulation of incidents that residents tolerated, then resented, and finally refused to overlook any longer. When Meghan and Harry first arrived in Montecito, the community response was, by most accounts, curious but warm. Neighbors understood that a royal couple seeking privacy would require a certain level of security. Tall hedges, private security personnel, limited public appearances. These things were accepted as reasonable. Montecito is, after all, a community that values discretion. Nobody expected Meghan and Harry to be waving from their front gates every morning. What neighbors did expect, what the community's culture quietly demanded, was a basic acknowledgement that everyone living within those manicured borders was entitled to the same peace and privacy that the Sussexes themselves had come to California to find. Instead, according to multiple sources speaking to outlets including Page 6, The Mirror, and local journalists embedded in the community, something different happened. The Sussex estate began to generate friction. Security teams reportedly blocked public paths used by joggers and cyclists. Construction noise disrupted the neighborhood's legendary tranquility. Events at the estate altered the rhythm of surrounding streets. And then came the drones. Lowe has been particularly specific about this. Multiple reports, including coverage from The Express in August 2025 and The Royal Observer in the same period, documented Lowe's comments about the drawbacks of having the Sussexes as neighbors. He spoke about unmanned aerial vehicles, not the small recreational toys that hobbyists fly on weekend afternoons, but professional-grade machines equipped with high-resolution cameras. Machines that, according to Lowe and other residents, drifted silently over private estates, capturing footage without the knowledge or consent of the people below. One incident described by Lowe involved a family barbecue at his own property. A drone appeared overhead, its camera oriented toward the gathering. When Lowe approached security personnel in the vicinity to raise his concerns, he was met with denials. No one knew anything. No one had seen anything. The drone simply hovered, filmed, and disappeared. It was not an isolated event. According to sources familiar with Lowe's perspective, he experienced similar intrusions repeatedly, and he was not alone. Other neighbors reported drones circling their pools, their gardens, their private outdoor spaces. One resident claimed that a drone had filmed a gathering of local celebrities, raising immediate and serious concerns about unauthorized recording. The question of who was operating these drones and for what purpose quickly became the central issue. Federal Aviation Administration regulations are clear on this matter. Drones must remain below 400 feet in altitude and are prohibited from flying over private property without the consent of the landowner. Sources familiar with the situation told outlets covering the story that FAA complaints spiked significantly in 2024 and 2025, with more than 15 incidents reportedly linked to the vicinity of the Sussex estate. Insiders suggested that the drones were not being flown for recreational purposes. The inference drawn by neighbors was that the footage was being gathered for content creation, potentially for Netflix projects or social media ventures connected to Meghan's growing media brand. This is where the story takes on its particular uncomfortable irony, because the reason Meghan and Harry gave for leaving the United Kingdom, the reason they cited in their explosive interview with Oprah Winfrey in March 2021 and in the Netflix documentary series they released at the end of 2022, was the relentless intrusion of the press. The inability to live privately. The cameras that followed them everywhere, the paparazzi who made their lives a daily ordeal. They came to America in search of the peace they said they had been denied. And yet, according to the neighbors they now live among, they arrived and proceeded to do to others exactly what had been done to them. That irony has not been lost on Montecito residents, and it has not been lost on Rob Lowe. Lowe's voice carries a particular weight in this community. He is not a newcomer. He is not someone passing through. He has lived in Montecito since the early 2000s, which, in the timeline of this neighborhood, makes him a veteran. He knows its rhythms, its customs, its unspoken agreements. He is the kind of neighbor who shows up to local events, who participates in community conversations, who takes the place seriously as a community rather than merely as a backdrop for his own life. When he speaks about the impact of the Sussex estate, he does so from a position of genuine investment in the place. The Royal Observer published a piece in August 2025 in which Lowe acknowledged that having Harry and Meghan as neighbors had brought increased attention to the area and that property values had been positively affected. He gave them credit for that, but he also made clear that the relationship between the Sussexes and their neighbors had not developed in the way anyone had hoped. He used language that was measured but unmistakably pointed. He alluded to behavior that violated what he called the community's code. And what that code amounts to at its most fundamental level is a single principle. Your freedom ends where your neighbor's begins. The drone incidents were not the only source of tension. Residents and local journalists began documenting a broader pattern of behavior that many felt was incompatible with Montecito's culture. Richard Minards, a veteran local journalist who has lived in the community for years and has written extensively about its social dynamics, gave an interview in May 2025 that was picked up by Page 6, The New York Post, The Times of India, and GB News. Minards described Meghan as practically invisible to the Montecito community. He said she had never tried to fit in, a striking phrase that echoes throughout the coverage of this story. While he acknowledged that Prince Harry was seen as more approachable and was perceived favorably by many residents, he was direct in his assessment that Meghan's presence had not enriched the community in the ways that had been hoped. By March 2026, Markle, Page 6, and Reality T were all reporting that something had shifted decisively. The sources speaking to these outlets used strong language. Montecito neighbors were avoiding the Sussexes. No one wants to be seen with them, one source told Page 6 on March 23, 2026. A separate report described neighbors as exhausted by the situation, with Yahoo Entertainment reporting just one day ago, April 8, 2026, that Meghan and Harry are now reportedly looking for a new home, driven by claims that their Montecito neighbors have reached the end of their patience. Let us dwell on that for a moment, because it is extraordinary. This is a couple who left one country citing the impossibility of remaining there, who spent millions building a new life in one of the most beautiful and private communities in the world, and who now find themselves, 6 years after that move, potentially facing the prospect of having to move again. Not because of the press, not because of the royal family, but because of their neighbors. The bullying allegations, separate from but connected to the drone controversy, add another dimension to the story. Multiple sources have described incidents in which residents or their staff who raised concerns about the Sussex estate were met not with dialogue, but with legal threats. Cease and desist letters sent over minor disputes. Cold responses from Meghan's team when neighbors tried to address issues directly. What sources describe as subtle social punishment for anyone who dared to push back? One family, according to reporting that has circulated widely, received a legal letter after complaining that bright security lights from the Sussex estate were shining into their home at night. A complaint that in any ordinary neighborhood would be resolved with a brief conversation became, in this context, the subject of formal legal correspondence. Frank McGinty, an 88-year-old veteran who has lived in the Montecito area for many years, recounted an experience that became something of a symbol for the community's frustration. He had wanted to welcome the Sussexes to the neighborhood, a gesture of genuine goodwill, and arrived at the estate gates with a gift of local history films. He was turned away, not gently redirected, turned away in a manner he described as rude and unwelcoming. For an 88-year-old man who had come bearing a gift from the heart, the experience was humiliating. And it became, in the community's collective memory, a shorthand for everything that had gone wrong. Even figures who might be expected to sympathize with Meghan and Harry have been conspicuously quiet. Oprah Winfrey, who conducted the famous 2021 interview with the couple and whose friendship with Meghan was once openly celebrated, has a property in Montecito. Ellen DeGeneres, who also lived in the area, has said nothing publicly. This silence from powerful allies is, in its own way, telling. In a community where social connections are everything, the absence of public support from people of that caliber speaks volumes. There have been those who have defended the Sussexes. Some Montecito residents have pointed to the genuine security challenges the couple faces: the intrusive paparazzi, the drones flown by members of the press toward their estate rather than from it, the legitimate threats that require a serious security operation. Some have suggested that what reads as arrogance or entitlement is actually a trauma response, a couple so badly burned by their experiences with the media and the royal institution that they have retreated into a defensiveness that can look, from the outside, like hostility. These are fair points, and they deserve to be acknowledged. But they do not fully explain the pattern. Because what Rob Lowe and Richard Minniard's and anonymous neighbors are describing is not a couple struggling to cope. It is a consistent mode of operation, one characterized by expansion rather than retreat, by assertion rather than accommodation. The drone allegations suggest not a couple hiding from the world, but a couple actively gathering footage of their world. The legal threats suggest not people desperate for privacy, but people willing to use institutional power to silence dissent. The invisibility that Minniard's describes is not the invisibility of someone hiding from pain. It is the invisibility of someone who has decided that the community around them is not worth engaging with. And that, perhaps, is the most damaging thing that can be said about anyone in Montecito. Because the community's entire identity is built on a certain kind of mutual respect. A recognition that everyone there, regardless of how famous or how wealthy, has earned their place and has a responsibility to honor the place in return. Rob Lowe has honored it for 2 decades. Richard Minniard's has honored it. The 88-year-old veteran who showed up with a gift honored it. The expectation was that the Sussexes would honor it too. They did not. And now the community is reckoning with that. The involvement of official authorities adds a further layer of gravity to this story. Reports have indicated that officials from the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Office were made aware of drone-related complaints and that the FAA was drawn into the picture through formal complaints about airspace violations. When a community dispute escalates to the point of involving federal aviation regulators, it has clearly moved well beyond the realm of neighborhood gossip. These are documented, formal complaints. They carry legal weight, and they represent a significant escalation in what began as private frustration. Rob Lowe's decision to address these matters publicly, even if initially through the veiled language of a podcast episode, was a turning point. When a man of his stature, with his community roots and his professional credibility, declines to protect a neighbor's reputation, it signals that something serious has occurred. His message was not delivered in anger. Insiders have consistently emphasized that Lowe is not motivated by malice. He did not set out to destroy Meghan Markle's reputation or to embarrass the Sussexes for sport. He set out to restore peace to a community he loves. But in doing so, he brought the full weight of public attention to bear on allegations that might otherwise have remained inside Montecito's walls. The question now, as we reach April 2026, is where this story goes. Reports that Meghan and Harry are looking for a new home suggest that the situation may be approaching a natural resolution, one in which the Sussexes move on and Montecito returns to its habitual serenity. But the deeper questions raised by this story do not resolve so easily. What does it mean when a couple who built their post-royal brand on the language of privacy and freedom from intrusion stands accused of violating the privacy of their own neighbors? What does it mean when the community that welcomed them with open arms 5 years ago has, according to sources as credible as Page Six and local journalists with decades of embedded knowledge, quietly turned its back? And what does it mean for the American chapter of the Sussex story? The chapter that was supposed to be the triumphant reinvention, the proof that they had been right all along. These are questions that this community, and the wider world watching it, are now asking with increasing urgency. Because the promise of Montecito was that it would be a fresh start. A place where the rules were clear, where privacy was sacred, where two people who had endured extraordinary public scrutiny could finally exhale. And instead, it has become the setting for a new controversy, one that is, in many ways, more painful than anything that came before. Because this time, the criticism is not coming from tabloid journalists or rival royals or anonymous palace insiders. It is coming from neighbors. From ordinary, if extraordinarily wealthy, people who simply wanted to live their lives in peace. Rob Lowe is one of those people. And when he speaks, Montecito listens. When he says that lines were crossed, that a community sanctuary was violated, that behavior he has witnessed over years of proximity has finally compelled him to say something that carries weight that no official statement or carefully crafted public relations response can easily counter. The irony at the heart of this entire story is, as so many have noted, almost too perfect. A couple who fled one form of intrusion, and then, whether intentionally or through catastrophic miscalculation, brought a new form of intrusion to the people around them. A couple who demanded the right to tell their own story and who may have, in the process, given their neighbors a story of their own to tell. A couple who came to Montecito in search of peace and who have, according to those closest to the situation, left precious little of it behind. As the sun sets over those manicured hedges and private gates, as the Pacific glimmers in the distance and the mountains cast long shadows over the winding roads, Montecito is waiting to see what comes next, waiting to find out whether the chapter it has lived through for the past 5 years is finally drawing to a close. And waiting, perhaps, to simply be itself again. That quiet, sun-drenched sanctuary where even the most famous people in the world know to treat their neighbors with respect. Whether that waiting will be rewarded remains to be seen. But one thing is clear, Rob Lowe has spoken. The community has spoken, and the world, for better or worse, is listening to every word. If this story has moved you, if it has given you something to think about, please leave your thoughts in the comments below. We genuinely want to know what you think. Do you believe the allegations against Meghan are fair? Do you think the Sussexes have been judged too harshly by a community that was never going to accept them? Or do you think Rob Lowe was right to speak out and that the principle of community accountability applies equally to everyone, Duchess or not? Share your view. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss a new chapter in a story that, whatever happens next, is far from over. And thank you sincerely for watching.